Well, hello watercolor artists, my name is Ryan Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this painting demonstration. Today we're going to be creating a painting of the Florence Duomo, also known as, I have to look this one up, the Maria Delphi. I've read some books that were shorter than that, but that's what we're working on today. This is the reference image we'll be working from. It's a black and white photograph I shot from Michelangelo, which overlooks the Arno River, and we're going to be simplifying the shapes quite a bit. It's going to be a fun photograph. This is an 11 by 17 printout. The black and white printout, of course, is the Florence Duomo, and I always work with black and white photographs. I don't like to use color images. When I use color photographs, I have a tendency to try to recreate or reproduce the colors in the photograph, and when I'm painting, I don't really care what the original colors are. The reason I use black and white photographs is because it shows me the values, where the dark areas are and where the light areas are. And so this is what I'm using for this painting. Now, the first thing I want to do, I want to paint this image very quickly. I'm going to use masking fluid. Masking fluid is also called drawing gum or frisket. This is the Pabeo brand. I'll hold this up here. This is a pretty relatively inexpensive masking fluid. It's kind of a thinner one. It dries very quickly. It does dry kind of a nasty blue-green color, as you can see here in the bottle. So you actually can see very clearly where it goes. I don't really like the blue-green. I like the old gray they used to have. The rep from the company told me they're going to go back to the original gray. I get to see that, but that's what I've heard. Now, when you use masking fluid, don't use your expensive watercolor brushes because you're literally just putting your brush into liquid plastic, and once it does start to dry, it's going to destroy your brushes. Get some inexpensive brushes. This is the Cheap Joe's ugly brush with 2 G's. It's even spelled ugly. I buy about 40 of these a year. They're about $1.80 or $1.75, something like that. And I use these guys. Now, when you're using a masking fluid, remember to rinse off the brush quite a bit because whenever the masking fluid gets up into the ferrule of the brush, it's going to start to destroy the brush, and eventually the brush won't hold the point. It'll start to look like this. So what you want to do is rinse your brush off quite a bit. Go into your palette. I use 2 cups of water for masking fluid. This is my first rinse, and this is my second rinse. And you'll see over time, even both rinses get really disgusting. But if you use 2 rinses, I find that after the second rinse, you've got most of the masking fluid out of the brush, so it's not drying in there. It seems to last a lot longer. I can usually get by with doing 2 full sheet paintings on one brush before it completely loses the point and I have to throw it away. In this painting, what I want to do is I'm going to paint it relatively quickly using a limited palette with usually 3 or 4 colors for the most part. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use masking fluid to protect the whites of the paper. Now in this photograph, I'm going to change things around a little bit. I'm going to make this a little bit darker back here. This is, as it comes more towards you, then it's going to be white in these areas of the building. This is kind of an overcast day in Florence. So I'm going to apply masking fluid into these shapes here. As long as you keep it geometric, it's going to render as architecture. And I'm going to not cover this area because I want to cover that with color in a little bit. But I've got to protect all these white spots and white areas in here first when I paint this really quickly. Then after it's dry, then I'll peel it off and I'll go in and I'll spot tone certain white areas. But all this needs to be protected first. I'm going to leave my original photograph up here so I can look at it while I'm doing this. And I'm going to spot tone these areas right now using masking fluid. And then I'm going to start going into here. You can see how this dries. As I said, it's kind of bluish gray. And I don't have to be perfect. I can make it look like there's some windows in a couple areas. But everything that's light, I want to protect. And I'm going to go back into here too, in the background where there's all these little details, because that will make it look like it's buildings receding distance. First rinse, second rinse, then I'll wipe it off in my pants. You don't have to do that. That step is optional. And this stuff dries pretty quickly. I'm doing this the wrong way right now. I'm left-handed, so I usually go right to left. Now watch out when you use masking fluid because it is liquid latex. If it gets into your clothes, you're not going to get it out again. I also try not to get it on my hand either because if it dries on top of your hair, it's very painful to get that off. That's why I'm continually moving my painting around when I use masking fluid. I'm trying to keep my hand and my clothes out of the wet areas. Here is the painting with all the masking fluid on it and applied and dried. You can see I went in and I covered all of those lighter areas with the Cheap Joe's ugly brush, and then where I wanted to get some finer details down in some of these areas, how I did that was with a calligraphy pen that you can get at art supply stores. You can use this for masking fluid also. It gives you very fine lines. It doesn't hold a lot of masking fluid, but it does work for really fine areas. And the important part about this stage is you have to make sure that the masking fluid is 100% dry before you start painting. So we're going to make sure that this is dry, and then we're going to start painting on this next. Now we've spent all this time doing our drawing, applying our masking fluid and drying it thoroughly. It's time to start putting down the first layer of color. Now watercolor can be very fickle because you pretty much get one chance to get it right at the beginning, and It's always good to have an idea with what you're going to do when you start out. I always have ideas in my head, but I like to do color studies beforehand just to make sure that it's going to work. So I initially started, I wanted to put some green and orange into this painting. I don't think those colors worked well together. So I changed my mind a little bit, and I ended up using quinacridone burnt orange, Mayan blue, and buff titanium, all by Daniel Smith. I think these colors really look nice together, and then a little bit of wet testing. So I think these three colors are going to work well. I think this painting will look nice with that. Now up in my palette here, I'm going to go to the upper left-hand corner. Buff titanium is in the lower left-hand corner here. This is quinacridone burnt orange, and it's hard to see because these are all very dark, but this is Mayan blue here. I might throw a little bit of Sodalite Genuine into the mix also. This is here. Basically that is just a very grainy black, but I'm going to do that in the darker areas, not the sky. So it's basically just going to be those 3 or 4 colors mixed with a little bit of what I have maybe on my palette just to give it some hints of some green, but that's basically what I'll be using in this painting. So a word of warning before you do start painting, make sure to change your water after you use masking fluid. The masking fluid, of course, the liquid latex, it's plastic, so if you don't change your water, if you're using those brushes with the same water, it's going to be drying in the brushes and will destroy the brushes eventually. So just make sure you change your water out. Now I'm going to start with this painting, and the idea is, even though the sunlight in the photograph is coming from the right hand side, for the most part you kind of see that on the side of the Duomo, I'm going to start with mostly titanium up here. I want to have this. Now buff titanium is an interesting color. It's very opaque, granulated yellow. It does not like to be layered upon the Daniel Smith color, of course. Now as I continue to do this, I'm going to switch to a little bit of Mayan, and I want to get more of just kind of a gray mix up at the top here. My board is propped up a little bit, so gravity will bring the water down. I do want that. Just some more yellow. Just kind of knock that back a little bit. And switch to a little bit of quinacridone. Not too much. This is a pretty strong color, so you don't need a lot of it. Now I'm starting to get a lot of water underneath the top of my board. So I'm going to stick a paper towel underneath here. That will give you a lot of blossoms if you don't watch out for it. And as that starts to dry on you, it always ends up on the sides of the painting. Difficult to get rid of those easily later. Back to a little bit of titanium. Letting gravity bring this all down. A lot of this white in the top of the Duomo has been masked off, so I'm not really worried about that. Start to get down a little ways. I'm going to kind of just bounce back and forth between some warms and cools. I'm going to avoid painting a lot of that area right now. I'm going to go back, jump around with it. I'm going to bring this I want to paint all this area. So I'm just going to let some water just wash this down. Same here. The top of the Duomo is a little bit darker, so I'm going to put some different colors into there. Darken that down just a little bit. Back to some blue, Mayan blue. Drop it in behind here, so this area a little bit behind. This has to be a little bit cool. Now I'm not too worried about the hills in the background yet. Deal with that in a little bit. Drop in some different colors. Just play around with it, going back and forth. Make sure that you emulsify the color enough so it's not just pure color that you're dropping down on the paper. I don't want to get left-hand side of the Duomo, the right-hand side, our right-hand side. I don't want to paint that because that's the brightest area. A little bit of Mayan, and I'm going to bring that just down into here. Now in the photograph, this area is all under scaffolding, but the beauty of art is we can change that. And as I get down in this area, I'm just going to use some straight water. Just let this just down here. Okay, put that up just a little bit. Alright, and as we start to get into foreground area, drop some darker blues in here. Now, when you're dropping in colors, one of the things about colors that you want to be aware of is you don't want to get too symmetrical with them. If you put a little bit of blue here, just put it here, just don't make it so repetitious. So it's not the exact same formula over and over. Do that, it gets boring very quickly. Then mix up some Sodalite Genuine, drop in some dark to this area. And then I'm going to go back to some quinacridone and start dropping some of it into here. Now, there's not a lot of rhyme or reason necessarily at this stage. It's just about making it look good. If it feels right to you, paint it. If it doesn't, perhaps I think I covered a big area. I might want to get some water, lighten that up. Now let's go back to some Mayan blue. Some color down there. Now I talked about the hills up here. I want to be careful about this because it's going to give me a water blossom. We want to go a little bit indication of the hills back here. So we'll drop a little darker color on top of that. Let gravity do its thing. Bring that down. If I had this flat, it would definitely give you a water blossom. This is tilted at a slight angle. And because I did the hills on the left-hand side of the Duomo, now I've got to go put a little bit of, darker. Oops, that was pure paint. I'm going to emulsify that while it's still wet. So it's kind of running all over the place. But that's okay. Alright, now, and go back to some quinacridone burnt orange, which, as I mentioned earlier, is very strong. It overtakes things pretty quickly. It's just in the background. Don't let sections dry too much on you, though. We'll give you hard edges. edges, and this kind of dries very quickly. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow on the left-hand side of the picture. There really isn't one. Just kind of dry brush effect that and water that down a little bit. I don't want such a hard edge here, so basically just adding pure water. Okay, so I just kind of splash that back up into it. Alright, now as I'm getting over here, I want to get some darker colors in here, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of my Sodalite Genuine with Mayan Blue. Remember, Sodalite Genuine is very granulating, and some dark here. You know, just if it looks boring, something to change. I could either be adding a color. Now I've got a lot going on here. I'm going to go back to Buff Titanium, put some down in this area. Now there's a lot of blue in that area. I'm going to get a hard edge here. If I don't watch out for this, and hit that with some water, let that bleed out into here. And the same thing up here by the Duomo. We start to get a hard edge here. I don't want very dark shadows there, so I'm going to hit that with some water. Kind of let that just bleed down here. Now I'm going to get a little blossom here, so I'll go into that, knock that back a little bit. And while this area up here starts to dry, I like just trying to get rid of some hard edges. Now I've got some very bright areas of orange in this section. I have nothing over here. Now I'm looking at the picture a little bit. Just going to drop a little bit more blue there. Now this is a little bit darker up in here, so I'm going to hit some Mayan Blue with that area. What I'm trying not to do is let this blue bleed out into here, though. That would be bad. So the whole area is wet, and that's one of the nice things about masking fluid. It acts as a it stops the paint from going where you don't want it to go. So it can be good sometimes. Now, I don't want that too dark. So I'm going to go back to a mixture of Buff Titanium. You can see up in here, this is where I touched the sky a little bit. So now it's kind of bleeding out. Alright, I'm just going to hit this with some water. Let that bleed down here. And get the brush mostly dry, paper towel. And here also I want to get rid of super hard edges. Now, I kind of invented this shadow over here. So get the brush mostly dry with the paper towel. At that point in time, now it's going to be soaking up color. It's called a thirsty brush. So I'm at the kind of taking out stage where before things dry too much on it, you really can kind of lift out a lot of what's going on. Now this area up in here, get rid of that edge. Sometimes you have to switch to a brush that's a little bit harder. I was using a squirrel mop brush. I love squirrel mop brushes. They hold a lot of paint, a lot of water, but I use my squirrel so they don't keep wonderful points forever. Looking up some of that color, I'll lift up the paper just a little bit and have a lot of paint at the bottom of the paper. Alright, now looking at the painting, I got a little bit of the water blossom up in this area. I'm not going to worry about the sky too much right now because I can go back into that in a little bit and darken that down when it's dry. The problem is that the whole thing is super wet, so if I go into here right now, I'm probably just going to end up screwing things up and soak up a little bit of that with a thirsty brush. I don't like this area, but I'm going to mix up a little bit more. I'm going to clean off my palette for just a quick second. This goes against everything I believe in. Just flick some paint, it's very opaque. And I'm going to get the brush, thirsty brush, so it's mostly dry at this point in time. Actually, I'm going to switch back to my squirrel mop here. This will soak up a lot more water, and I'm just kind of soaking up that big puddle of water. If you set the paper flat, that's going to turn into a big water blossom. Always watch underneath the paper too. Be careful if water creeps underneath it too, because water does get underneath the paper and it's going to form a water blossom once it starts to dry. Now that is, I'm going to sit down for a second here and take a look and evaluate. This is the part I think can be really fun. Now what I do is the paper, you can see the sheen of the paper as it slowly starts to dry. I want to go back into some areas, darken a few things down. So I'm going to use a combination now of Sodalite Genuine, which is a very granulating black. Don't put masking fluid on top of Sodalite Genuine though, because it basically lifts off all the color. And I know this because I did this by accident once and I was not happy. It just pulled everything off. It's just about the binder for those paints. It's very interesting. Alright, so now I'm just playing around with just getting the eye to move through the piece. Got some darks right there, some areas in here. How does the eye move? And pay attention to things as they're drying, because I'm getting a big, not blossom, but all the colors creeping down into here, and I want to lift out a lot of that. So you get the brush that's mostly dry, and at that point in time what will happen is instead of putting color down on the paper, it's going to soak it up if it's mostly dry. If the paper's wetter and the brush is drier, it soaks color up. Now this paper towel is completely soaked, so I'm just going to flatten that and dry it out tonight. Reuse it again tomorrow. Save trees, save paper towels. Okay, go back into here and I'm going to put away. Oops, that was a little much. Yeah, right now I'm just looking at trying to analyze what's going on in here, just for a little bit of variety. It's kind of all kind of starting to look the same. Maybe a couple water blossoms. I'm not going to do as much though because everything's pretty wet. I want to get some water blossoms, lay this flat. If I lay flat, again, watch out for the paint that's underneath it, that water out of there. Now, if I want to get some blossoms in the background, just drop some pure water down under there. The water might be pretty dirty at this point in time, but It's a little darker in here. You really get overboard with doing this, try not to do too much. Now, it looks pretty bad right now, I'm not gonna lie. I'm trying to get rid of these edges. I could use a paper towel to soak some of this up. You gotta be careful because I don't have any clean paper towels right now. And the light's coming from basically this side. Keep this a little bit lighter, so I'm just taking out some of that burnt orange, which is a very strong stain color. Do a little water blossom right here. It's gonna kind of create the impression of texture. And I think that's pretty much it for the first layer. I'm gonna keep going back here and just messing around a little bit. Famous last words. Take out that line, which I don't want there. And at this point in time, you really, you don't want to disappear for 20 minutes and go watch a movie and come back. You got to kind of pay attention to what's going on as it starts to dry a little bit. I'm going to go, see, I was thinking about adding some blue into here, but this is almost dry, and if I do that, I'm going to get a background, which I don't think I'm going to want. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt orange into here. And looking at the picture, I want to take out a little bit of this blue. You can drop in the water and get a blossom. Blossoms happen over time. You got to be careful. See, this I like, that blossom I did up there, but if you do too much water, it spreads too much. This on the left hand side is a little bit darker than I want it to be, so a thirsty brush, I'm going to lift off most of it, and I think this is looking better. It's got movement, it's got a sense of light, a glow to it. The sky, which I said I didn't like to start with, this is drawing a lot lighter now, so it's not really bothering me. If I want to go back in later and get darker areas for the hills in the background, I can always do that, but that's not something I really want to work on right now. Paper feels cold to the touch, which means it's still very wet, so I don't want to do too much, so I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to get rid of this edge and get my paint there. Just a little bit more with kind of sculpting, pull out some color, and again, it doesn't have to make perfect sense. Like, it's architecture. I think we know it's architecture. Lift out a couple areas, and now I'm going to dry this with a hairdryer, and then I'll come back in just a few minutes here. So I thoroughly dried everything with the hairdryer. Make sure that the paper doesn't feel cold to the back of your hand. If it's cold, it's still wet. So make sure that it's 100% dry before you go back and you try to layer on top of the first layer. If it's still wet, you're just going to lift everything off and make mud on the painting. Now, what I did here in the background of the painting, you've got the lines of the hills back in these areas, and what I want to do is I want to have a little bit of a harder line here, and then start to have it here but feather a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mixture of a tad bit of quinacridone, mostly cone with a little bit of the blue, Mayan blue, and then I have to turn this sideways while I do this here. I'm going to follow the pencil line a little bit, and I'm not making it, again, perfect. It's a little bit irregular, and then let that color just kind of creep down. Again, hit it with water and let gravity do its work. And then just pure water here, feather this out a little bit. And then what I want to do now is I'm going to go back and start on this side of the Duomo. If you have a hard line, going behind something, it probably shouldn't just stop there. What you want to do is you want to continue that hard line and have it come out on the other edge, because what that does is it starts to create interaction of what's foreground and what's background. It tells you the hierarchy of where things are in this painting. Now, I don't want to do too much back here, also because I'm starting to get back up into the area where a lot of that buff titanium is, and as I mentioned earlier, buff titanium is not like it when you go back into it. Hit that, a little bit of water at the top just to infuse that edge. Try not to play around with that too much, and then I'm going to set that flat. Now what I've done is gone back in and put just a little bit of definition of hills in the background. So the harder edge here pops out behind the Duomo. This is going to make this come forward, and then feathered it out on the left hand side. Well, the hills are mostly dry. I mentioned earlier that I didn't like what was going on up in this section right here. I got some wet areas. It started drying me. I think I went back in and put some of that color into it. So it's kind of just a weird shape. So what I'm going to do is take some mostly clean water, my brush, which is a little bit, not the squirrel, a little bit harder. And these colors aren't staining colors. So what I'm doing now is I'm just disturbing the layer that's underneath it, and with the thirsty brush, I'm just lifting that off a little bit. Now, I'm going to be careful because buff titanium doesn't like it when you play with it. So I got that just a little bit wet right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a smaller spray bottle, and because I've got wet area here, I'm going to diffuse, just spray the area around it, so if I start to get a hard edge somewhere, it's going to creep out into here. And monitor, of course, don't let things just sit. And this should probably, if I start to think I'm getting a hardness in place, I'm going to go back in with the thirsty brush. Just take a little bit of it out, color will spread just a little bit, and I think that's pretty good right there. So I'm going to dry that again. It's hard to see what's going on in the picture because you've got a lot of things covered under blue-green masking fluid. You've got your three colors down here. You're starting to build your hierarchy. You've got your hills in the background. You've got the Duomo popping forward. So now I'm going to start working on some of the detail in the Duomo. I'm not going to get super detailed with this painting. Obviously, if I zoom in on the picture here, there's a lot. You could go bonkers with this sort of thing, but just the idea is just get the basics down. And people know if they've been to Florence, they're going to know it's all, I think. All right, now we're back to working on all the details here, and as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, there's a lot going on in here, and I'm not going to end up painting all these individual lines. The idea is I want to have more focus of attention where I'm going to have the most contrast contrast, which is this section right here. So I'm going to make this less dark and less dark. You know, darker up in here a little bit just to get the eye to go there also. But I want the eye really to focus in on here because this is going to be the area of highest contrast in the painting, and then simplify the details quite a bit. So I'm going to put this picture over here. I actually don't see the one on the screen that's on your lower left hand side, so I've got to have my photo reference here. Now what I'm going to do with my palette is, the brush is wet of course, and I'm really just kind of start with just kind of a dark mix. I took a little bit of hematite genuine. I know I haven't used that one yet, but these colors are all pretty darn dark to start with. So if you're trying to make black, it's pretty easy to do so. You just want to use more paint, less water. I'm getting just a nice thick mixture here. So I'm going to start over here with the, I'm looking at my picture here. I'm going to put a window, actually changing my mind right now. I'm going to kind of do I'm going to make this not so dark right now, which means I need a paper towel. And then I will let this dry. I'll go back in and do the darkest area on top, but I'm just going to get a little bit of this detailing in here. That was kind of a mixture of the quinacridone burnt orange and the Mayan blue, which of course blue and orange together are going to make kind of a gray. I'll go ahead and do the dark on that in just a little bit here. I'm going to feather this edge out just a tad bit and go back to some more blue here. And now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the same thing in this window, but not making it black yet. I'm going to alternate. I'm always going back and forth with the colors between warm versus cool. In the photograph it looks like there's a little bit more of a shadow on the lower side down towards the ground here. Again, not perfect. Wash that brush out. Just kind of feather it a little bit, let that color run into those areas, and go back to the palette, and I'm using a little bit more of just the quinacridone burnt orange at this point in time. Let that bleed into that a little bit. Rinse the brush. Could have a little bit of a shadow up there. You want to take off a little bit of the color. Get the brush thirsty so it's lifting off. Go back into here as this starts to dry. Take some of that off. Again, you should be using clean paper towels if you're doing that. I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to miss a few spots to give it kind of the impression of the tiles of the roofs. Make my way across here. Miss a little bit of the white of the paper, even though that's not technically white there. Make that. Just creates more movement in the piece. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't drive yourself bonkers. Go hit it with water, just straight up water. Let that color bleed into there. And then I'm going to switch to a little bit more as I get towards the outer of the edges here. I put some more blue on my brush, and let's mix these two colors, get ourselves our gray. And if I want to keep that flat, see how that water's running back in? I use weights. I just get these from Lowe's, Home Depot, and you just glue together a bunch of 2-inch washers. It's a really nice, easy way to weigh down your paper if you want to. Lifting off a little bit of that big puddle, and I kind of like that. Alright, so I did a lot of the detail in the Duomo, and it looks like there's a lot of information put in there. It really isn't that much. As I said, you could really go overboard with this scene here. The higher contrast is right here where I want it to be, so your eye kind of goes here. I'm going to put a little bit more detail into these sections. This part's kind of difficult to see what's going on over in here because it's under scaffolding, but I'm just going to have to just try to make it up. But I want your eye to go here. This is really going to look different once you take off the masking fluid, because this is going to be where all the pure white in the painting is. So I'm going to do a little bit more detailing here, put some of the windows into some of the buildings in the foreground here, some of the darker darks, but not black, and then peel it off and see what it looks like. So in the past few minutes now, what I've done is I've gone into the foreground here, and I have started putting in some of the just kind of the calligraphy and architecture of of the buildings. Don't make it too perfect. I mean, this is just the idea of architecture. So just go in and drop in a couple darks, create some separation between areas. Like if I want this to look like it's in the shadow, put some darks down here. Just don't spend too much time working on it. Put a little bit of a dark area into there. Oops, that was a bit much. Let's take that out. We've got a nice little shadow on this area here. Let's drag that, feather that out a little bit. And I think it's starting to look pretty good. I put a couple of the dark areas, darks into here. So now I think your eye really goes towards here, this window, and this window. I'm going to do another darker area, just pure black right on top here. Now you can see here that this is really dark, this is less dark, and this is even less so. So this, your eye's going to go here because this is the most contrast. Alright, back to working on some more of the details here. I'm going to go with more Mayan blue at this point in time. I'm going to work over on the right side of the picture here, and I'm just going to try to get some little shapes in here, geometric shapes of course. Render architecture. Doesn't have to necessarily make sense. I need to push things behind. I want the dome here to come forward a little bit, and this is kind of in the darker area. So what I'm going to do behind that is I'm going to put some of the geometric shapes to indicate architecture. Bring that out this way, and then a little line here, and that's going to make that dome come forward now. So now it's looking like it's not in the background as much. And over here also I want to have this come forward. I've got this dark area in shadow here, and I'm going to use a mixture of the cone burnt orange, Mayan blue, with it leaning towards the quinacridone burnt orange side. And I'm going to go back to a little bit more Mayan blue down in this section here, darker. Kind of hard to see what's going on here right now. I'm not really looking at the photograph too much. I'm just looking at the picture pretty much, and kind of just going by judgment, and I'm just going to feather all that out. So now that that's darker, I think that this area over here comes forward a little bit more. I feel like this is all pretty uniform in here. I want to get a little bit of variety, just some kind of shapes, a little bit with the windows here, a couple lines, you know, electrical lines, there's the TV antennas, there's just stuff all over the place. Just don't make it too perfect. There's a little bit of some detail up on the roof. There's little dots. I'm not sure what those are, if those are windows, or I'm not even worrying about making them evenly spaced at all. And those are going to tap it down a little bit so it doesn't show up too much. I also have to get there's little windows up here on the dome, and that's about there. I didn't draw these in, I'm just putting these in here just by looking at the picture. I'm going to water down the solution here. And as I said, you could get really detailed into these guys if you really want to, because there's a lot going on in the Duomo, but the question is how lazy can we be instead. Let's go here, and then you've got 3 up. I'm going to skip one, and then this side you've got 1, 2, skip the third. I tap down a couple of those so it's not all the exact same darkness, lightness, and then I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to do the 1, 2, skip. I'll do the third. Let's go over to this side. 1, 2, 3. Go up to here now. 1, skip 2, do 3, and I'm going to go up to the top here. I'm going to use more cadmium burnt orange, and I want to get this dark area in here. Rinse that out a little bit. I'm going to go to some of the buff titanium, and I had quinacridone burnt orange on the brush already. It's going to give me very opaque. I'll put that into there. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but it's just simplifying it. Rinse the brush off so I just have a little bit of paint. I'll do a thinner line, or try to. Didn't just do that. And I always love to tap certain areas, so don't make the lines while things are still wet. You can always go back into it and hit it with a little bit of water, let things feather out a little bit. This is definitely darker up in here towards the sky. A lot of that's covered in masking fluid right now, so I can't do too much. Put a little bit of that info in there. Water to feather this out. I'm going to feather a couple of those edges. Now I can make this darker, the dome part darker, so I'm going to go back into here. This is still pretty wet, and then I'm going to go back with the quinacridone burnt orange, and I'm running the risk again of sticking my hand into wet surfaces if I don't watch out. And I put that dark line in there, and then go back, clean water, feather this out, and I'll have to do a little bit more work on that. Is that a smudge or is that? Alright, I'm going to hit this with a hairdryer really quickly. Alright, I went into the foreground area and did a little bit more work, dropping in some darker shadows into some of the alleyways and just the idea of some buildings. I dropped a little bit of darker quinacridone burnt orange into this background area to kind of replicate what's going on over here on this side. It starts to look a little bit like tree shapes, geometric. What happened here, I needed some darker here because what that's going to do is that's going to make this come forward when I take off the masking fluid. I might have to go in and lighten up a little bit on the top here. My masking fluid went above where I wanted to go. So in the photograph you can see there's a white line crossing over here, and I might have to go back in and correct that later, but we'll see how it looks once I peel off the masking fluid. So you can still see several sections of the foreground that are wet. This really is just about kind of shapes, abstract shapes that are going to represent architecture when we peel all this off. What I'm going to use when I take off the masking fluid to do it very quickly is simply just another ball of masking fluid. This is just the old masking fluid that I just collect in a ball. It sucks up the masking fluid really quickly. It looks disgusting, but it takes it off very, very quickly. Now when I do this, the table moves quite a bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move, let me switch my, okay, so now let's take off the masking fluid using just the ball of masking. It's amazing how different it looks once you get back to the white of the paper. Now you see I had something still wet. Alright, let me stop this and use a hairdryer again just very quickly. Watch out when you get to the edges of paper with masking fluid. If you're using a ball like this, if you go inward, it has a tendency to grab the edge of the paper and tear it. When I use masking fluid at the edge of paper, I simply just go straight off the edge. And when you're doing this, it will shake my table all over the place. I have to make sure my water buckets aren't too close. And the ball will simply grow. Now, my problem with masking fluid is I never get it all off the paper. So I'll put things into frames and I'm looking at them a few days later and I'm like, I missed a spot. See how beautiful this starts to look? And the next step now is start doing some adjustments and corrections. And when I was taking off the masking fluid to start with, an area was still wet up in here. I'm going to pull the image up here and you can see where it just wiped color on the paper, you got to fix that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch. I have a device. You can use a brush, but the problem with the brush is it's not really strong enough. It doesn't lift off the color very easily. So what I instead is a thing called the Incredible Nib. It's made by Graphics with one Grafix, and it has two. I think it's some sort of a wood composite. But what you do is you get it wet on one of the ends, and this is going to disturb your color. It's going to make it mad and lift it off the paper. But the nice thing about this device is that because it's not a brush, it doesn't soak anything up, and you have to use a clean paper towel when you do this. So let me grab a clean paper towel, and so you just gently disturb your color in the white areas, and then take a paper towel, and you've gotten rid of it right there. Now up here on the Duomo, the same thing happened, but I don't want to take off all the color, so I'm going to disturb just this area a little bit and this area a little bit, pull it off a little bit, and you can usually hide these little blemishes pretty easily. Now of course using the paper towel is going to take off some of the color, but I'm not too worried about that right now. Alright, so that fixed most of it right now, so I'm not too worried about that. My next step is to, you could leave it like this if you want to, but now I think it's kind of confusing about background and foreground. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my colors again, and I'll go back to the palette here, and I'm going to use a lot of just kind of the pure colors. So what I'm going to do is, and again this goes against everything I believe in, cleaning off the palette. Should never do that. I'm going to take just a little bit of my blue, Mayan blue, water it down quite a bit because it's a very strong dark blue, and I'm going to start dropping it in just a very light value into just doing some push and pull on some areas. And these are buildings, so I'm going to try to keep it kind of geometric shape-ish, and I also want to keep it kind of random. Just knock some of these areas back a little bit. If it's too much, just take it off a little bit with the paper towel. Okay. See, I think that's already better. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn this for a quick second. Same thing back in here. I don't want pure white all the way back in the background. And now I'm going to go to a little bit of my buff titanium. And using some of that buff titanium, I'm going to get rid of a lot of the white areas in the background. We don't need all that. And just start dropping this in also. Leave a few white areas, but just not too many. You see how that already is starting to make a huge difference? That's pushing it back into the background again. Turn this sideways here. I don't want to stick my hand in wet paint. And kind of do the same thing for some of these areas in here. Again, make sure to keep it kind of random. Now I'm going to go to the quinadrichrome burnt orange, and we know that's a very strong color, so water it down quite a bit. Oops, see, told you it was too strong. And I put straight paint right down there. Alright, and dropping some of this color into there, getting rid of a lot of those white spots in the background. Doesn't have to be perfect. See how much the difference that already makes in the background? Now, I'm going to pick up my picture again because I want to be able to look at this a little bit clearer, and I'm going to kind of mimic the same thing in the foreground area. So I want to get rid of that white. I don't want that to be white. Switch back to some of the Mayan blue here. And just kind of go back and forth with colors here, and I don't like that edge. It's kind of hard. Some buff titanium, and get rid of that white area there. This really starts to bring the whole thing together. Alright, go back to some buff titanium, and looking at my photograph here, I want to get rid of the pure white in here. Let's make that a little bit darker, leave a little bit of white in some areas. Let's darken that down. Now when you're going over those dark areas, try not to go over them twice because you're going to start to lift off the color if you do that. The dark color underneath it, like I kind of started to do that. Get some more buff titanium mixed up. Remember, buff titanium has, obviously because of the name, titanium in it, so it's very opaque. Okay, don't want to do too much of the same thing, so I'm going to go back up to my puddle of Mayan blue, pretty watered down, and I'm going to knock back a couple areas in blue now. I'm not sure what I did over in this area here, but let's just make that a blue line coming down there. It's kind of instinctual at this point in time. We just have to do what feels right, and the more you do this, the easier it'll get. The more it'll start to make sense, I think. And sometimes you don't want it to make sense, so don't think too much. Alright, I'm back in this area. Let's knock that back a little bit with some blue. Let's do a line here. Let's make this a little bit darker. Let's put a little line here. And now let's go to my puddle of burnt orange and put that into a couple sections. Pretend that goes there. Make a little line. There's a lot of white area right here. Let's differentiate some of this. Let's leave a little bit of that white. I don't know what that's supposed to be. A line there. On this area in the foreground, let's just pretend there's a little bit of detail in the architecture. Put something into these windows here. Now let's go back to a little bit of the blue. Knock some of that down just a little bit. And I'm looking at this still. Okay, now there was an area, and I see it still doesn't technically make sense. If you look at this, you can't tell where the buildings start, where the buildings end sometimes, but it makes sense because it's geometric. And I like what's going on here. This is really popping out at me right now. I think that's working okay. I do need to fix this little area up in here, and I'm going to zoom in on this. You can tell when I masked off the area, I masked too much, and I went above that line there, which I think is kind of distracting. So I'm going to mix up a big dark, I'm going to take some dark off the palette, and I want to do a little bit of detailing on the top of the spire here, a little dark line right there. And now what I could do is just evaluating. I'm going to go in and put a little bit of dark into this area, pull that line out. Should be a little bit of a shadow. Now on the side of the dome, I've got to create a little bit of a darker area in this section. You can see in the picture that it's a little darker on that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into here and just darken that down just a little bit, make that pop out. Buff titanium and a little bit of the orange here. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to use more blue. The reason why I'm using blue right now is because I was going to put a little bit of a shadow in this area, but if I have orange against orange, it's not really going to stand out very much. And what I'm going to do now is I've got just a very light mixture of Mayan blue on the side. I'm just going to drop it in next to this orange color, and I'll take off a little bit of it, and I think that is almost all right. So looking at the image for a few minutes, trying to figure out what needs to be changed. And first off, I ended up with a spot of Mayan blue right there. Not really sure how that happened. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just some clean water on the brush. And the first thing, I'm just trying to get rid of this. Just touch it a little bit. Let it sit there for a few seconds. And sometimes you can take that off. Now, that didn't come off very easily. So I don't want to do any more water. So I'm going to use another method in a few minutes to fix that spot. Until that happens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my squirrel mop brush. And I do want to darken down these corners. I initially thought they were going to be dark enough, but that's the fun thing about art. Once you start to put in, all the other values, suddenly this isn't that dark anymore, and I do have to darken it down a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn this sideways, and I'm going to get just a mixture of my Mayan blue and some of the burnt orange, and make just a nice kind of gray color. Water it down quite a bit, and make sure that's not straight painted. I'm going to mix it up. Okay, so I got kind of a nice gray. It's not too dark, and I'm just going to go onto the side here, drop some of that color down. Now this is 140-pound paper, so you can see it's wanting to bulk up on me quite a bit, and rinse out the brush, come back with clean water, and just feather that color out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, buff titanium doesn't like it when you play with it very much, so try not to do too much in that area. Okay, you see how I just feathered that edge quite a bit? I can keep playing with it a little bit more. It's not quite exactly where I want it to be. The idea is get just a nice feathered kind of dark corner here. And now it's all wet, I want to go back in. I'm going to add some more Mayan and just drop a little bit of that in there. It will dry lighter, of course, but yeah, I think that's kind of what I needed there. I take off a little bit of it with a thirsty brush. Really watch the edges of where it's wet though, because when it starts to dry, it wants to give you a hard edge, and that's what we are trying to avoid. Go back in with your brush and just some clean water, and if you start to get a hard edge, go over just a little bit. Alright, now I see how that darkened down that corner quite a bit. I think that looks good. Now I want to do the same thing over on this side. Now on the right hand side, I don't want to use the orange though, because I think that'd be just too much competing with the foreground. So I'm going to go back to again my mixture of kind of my gray with more Mayan blue in it. So I'm into this area right now. You can see this is leaning towards the bluer side, and again it's hard because this paper is so curving on me. Rinse off the brush, straight water as you come down. Try not to go back and forth over the same area more than once if you can. That's easier said than done. I'm going to drop a little bit more color into here and just let it feather down. You could just spray the surface with water too. I do that for larger paintings instead of using a brush necessarily. I'll just spray an area, then drop the color in and let it move around. But for smaller paintings, I find it's just easier to just use a squirrel mop. Just letting that feather down this way a little bit. As you see, as it gets wet, then it starts to flatten on you. Now I think that's better. Darken down those corners. Gonna make the eye go more towards the center here. There are a couple, and I've got a little spot in there. Now that spot of Mayan blue, which I didn't like earlier, I told you I was going to get rid of. I tried using just a brush and a little bit of water. I think that's dry. So what I'm going to do is, so obviously if you use a brush, what happens is it has a tendency to start to lift off too much color, and then that little spot becomes a big problem. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm literally just going to take a snap blade, a razor blade, and where this little spot is, and it's got to be dry. I'm just going to scrape it off the top of the surface, and then take a white eraser, and so now you see there's a little bit of white from the paper showing through, and that's fine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take my brush of clean water, go back into here, and just disturb the color a little bit, and then when that dries, you won't even notice that spot anymore. So that's an easy fix for like little spots where you don't want them to be. Continue to look at the rest of the photograph to see if there's anything I want to change right now. Go back in with a little bit of my Mayan blue, kind of some more detailing at this point in time. Just drop in a little bit of just some different lines, so it's not all just big blobs of shapes. Put something in here. It just makes it a little more interesting. Alright, this is a eraser mark. That's not. And, so you see how I darkened down those corners. I can continue to play with that if I want to. I'm going to take a little bit of my just kind of dark mix here and on the palette, and I'm just going to put in a suggestion of a window. So if you mask out too much stuff to start with, always go back in later and fix it. Do a little line there. Just a little calligraphy. Doesn't really even have to make that much sense. And I think this painting is the finished painting. Last night, after I was done painting, I took my spray bottle, I sprayed the back of the paper with a little bit of water, put it between some heavy boards overnight, and then it's completely flat in the morning. And then after I pulled it out, I realized that when I was spot toning, I had some hard edges up in here. I wanted to get rid of those, so what I did was I just put a little bit of pure water down on top of those edges, let it soak in for a few seconds, and took a paper towel and just gently lifted out a little bit of the color. I had to lighten up this super dark area just a tad bit also. Use the same technique, just dropped a little bit of water onto this, let it sit for a few seconds, take your paper towel and soak up some of that color. And I'm going to call this painting complete now. I'd like to thank you for being a part of this video demonstration today. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you have any questions or comments, please, hopefully non-threatening ones, please send them to me and I'll give you as soon as possible. Good luck painting and enjoy.